Hello, Wildlife Center of the North Coast Volunteers. What I have here for you today is a brief overview of the clinic's protocols for raising orphaned waterfowl. So, various varieties of ducklings and also goslings. Not 100% of the protocols are going to be included here because there's quite a bit of information that is really specific down to, weights of animals and amounts of food, and that's all stuff that you can access in the clinic at the time that you are working with these animals, and that will probably be an easier way to do that. But this presentation will at least give you an overview of some of the ways that we care for these animals. We haven't had waterfowl at the clinic since I think 2022. It's been a couple of years. So for a lot of you volunteers that are newer, a lot of this information may be things that you're learning for the first time. So one of the reasons that we haven't had waterfowl in the last couple of years is because of the ODFW restriction on taking in waterfowl because of concerns about avian flu. So waterfowl, we know, can be asymptomatic carriers of avian flu, and for that reason, adult waterfowl will still not be allowed here in the clinic. ODFW is continuing to have restrictions on that, but our current understanding of how avian flu looks in baby waterfowl is that they're unlikely to be asymptomatic carriers. So if baby waterfowl is infected with avian flu, they are very likely to be symptomatic and not do very well, honestly. So in the absence of symptoms, we're going to be assuming that these animals are free of avian flu. They will be kept with their original brood that they come in with to the extent that that is possible, and will also be screened pretty carefully at intake for any symptoms. When it comes to group sizes, in general, orphaned waterfowl that comes in on its own, so if we get like a single duckling or a single gosling, those will be folded into another group of the same size. Ducklings, mallard ducklings in particular, can be really aggressive with very much smaller members of their species, and so it's important not to put really small ducklings with larger ones. In general, we'd like to keep the group sizes of animals manageable. So target group sizes would be 6 birds for mallards, although if they were to come in a group of, say, 8 or 9, we'd probably keep that 8 or 9 together rather than separating them. Wood ducks would all stay together unless there are more than 10 of them. And then goslings, we would likely be keeping in groups of about 4 birds. Okay, housing setup. So for people who have not been at the center during times of waterfowl, we have a few different housing setups that we can use, and those are used based on the age and size of the baby waterfowl. So really small ducklings or goslings that are under 2 weeks old are housed in what we call brooder boxes, and those are the black plastic tubs with the yellow lids that are kept in floor cages in the clinic. They have a dry side that has like a heating pad and a place for ducklings to hide, and then a wet side with the water tower, or once they're a little older, a water tub. And then when the ducklings are a little bit bigger, or goslings, at about 3 weeks, they would move into those outdoor duck boxes. And those are like the big wooden boxes on wheels that you see out in Aviary 1. They'll still be provided with a heat lamp and a place to hide and a dry area. But they'll have a little more space because they're larger, a little bigger water tub to swim in. And then at about a month old, they can be moved out of the duck boxes into the aviary itself, and they can freely roam around and have all the space they want to have until 6 weeks, when we will let them go. So for goslings, things are just a little bit different because they're larger. So for goslings, they will also start out in brooder boxes, but they can move into duck boxes a little bit sooner if need be. And that would typically be like if we have space constraints. So if we've got a ton of ducklings in the brooder boxes and there's just not room for goslings and the goslings are big enough, then they could move out into duck boxes sooner. And if the goslings are still needing a heat lamp, we would keep them in the duck boxes where there's a heat lamp that can be attached up until that's no longer the case, even if they're a little larger. Although when we move them into the aviary, we can provide a heat lamp. It's a little harder to guarantee that they use it when they have that much space. So it makes sense to keep them in a smaller space with a heat lamp if that's something that they're still needing. Mergansers can be combined with wood ducks if needed. It makes more sense than combining them with mallards just because they eat more similar things. And the way that we house them matches what we do for mallards and wood ducks for the first few weeks. But then after that, they actually will go over to Aviary 5 and hang out in the therapy pools over there. So the main thing to know about this is that will want to be making sure that there are multiple haulouts in the therapy pools when mergansers are in there. So if you've got, fledgling small mergansers in those therapy pools, the haulouts are a must, and we just would ask that any volunteers that are doing feeding or cleaning or anything like that, like before you leave that area, do a double check to make sure that there are haulouts and that the mergansers are able to access them and use them. If you notice that the ducklings don't appear to be staying waterproof, then we would put them back in a duck box with a heat source. So as we have could probably guess, and some of us have experienced, taking care of ducklings requires a lot of cleaning, and that's a big part of why we are very happy to have volunteers on all shifts in good numbers during duckling season, because pretty much everything is needing to be cleaned twice a day, sometimes even more often depending on the level of mess. Brooders, duck boxes, aviaries are cleaned in the morning during the AM shift, and then they are cleaned again during the PM shift. We will be separating or handling each brood of waterfowl separately for cleaning purposes this year. And just to kind of keep in mind that for AM cleaning, every few days, those birds are also going to be getting a weight check. So if you are in charge of AM duck box or brooder box or aviary cleaning, check their chart for whatever brood is there to see if they are needing to be weighed. And if you're not sure how to do that, you can check in with staff about how that works. In the afternoon, people cleaning should top off all the food and water as much as possible and just make sure that it looks like everything's all set for the overnight. Making sure that heat lamps are, placed in a safe place and it looks like they're working okay. And then we typically will also partially cover the outdoor duck boxes just to give a little bit of extra protection from the weather and give the ducklings or the goslings a little more sense of security there. When it comes to cleaning brooder boxes, you'll take all the ducklings out, or goslings, and put them into one of those blue totes together. And then you're going to want to clean out everything in that brooder box so that it looks nice and clean. Spray it down with Kennesaw, let it sit for 10 minutes, and then wipe it down. Each time it gets cleaned, refill the water tower as full as possible. As the ducklings get larger, the amount of water they go through is pretty remarkable, considering that even them being large, they're not that big. And then you'll want to refresh both their dry and their wet diets. And then after you put them back in the brooder box, clean the blue box that the animals were in, and that way it can be used again by whoever comes to clean on the next shift. When it comes to cleaning the outdoor duck boxes, you'll have a similar way of going about it, except it's a little easier because you're outside and you can use the hose. So you'll remove all of the animals from the duck box and put into a blue box the way you did indoors. Take everything out, remove diet, any like hides for hiding in, towels, fleece, all of that. Remove the heat lamp because you're going to be using water, and water and electricity are not good together. And then you can use the hose to just spray down the interior of the entire duck box and dump out the water tub and refill it. The fatigue mats that are in there in the duck boxes can get a lot of gross stuff trapped under them. So you'll want to like lift those up and spray underneath to make sure that you get everything off. And in some cases, it may make sense to just like pull them out and hose them down depending on how bad they are. Then you'll refill the water tub and put everything back in, replace fleece or towels with dry stuff. And refresh diets. And then after all that's done and you're done with the hose, you can go ahead and put the heat lamp back in. And then just like inside, you'll want to clean those blue boxes so that they can be used again. If they're drying, if you need to like wipe them out or wash them and dry them, then you can set them aside and just grab new ones from inside while the other ones dry. But it's handy to have those blue boxes nearby to make it easier for whoever's on the next shift to come along and clean. Cleaning aviaries themselves. So the first thing you'll do is drain the pool and dump out any water tubs that are hanging around. If you're not sure how to drain the pool or like where the how to activate the drain, you can ask a staff member about that. They're not easy to find, honestly, so it's worth asking. I should have made a little video in here of like where to find them. Then you can use the hose and spray down rocks and the sides of the pool, spray down any of the hides that the animals have been using if they've gotten gross, and then refill the pool and the water tubs and also diets. This is just like a little overview of what we use for diets. You'll learn a heck of a lot more about this when you are actually feeding the animals, and all of the specific information about how much to feed them at the various sizes that they are. That will all be here in the clinic and seemed like way too persnickety to include in an overview like this. But there are kind of specified amounts for the different species at different ages and weights, and all that information will be here for you to use when you are feeding them. Dry diet will be things like waterfowl starter and waterfowl maintenance, and then wet diet items are things like, greens. Sometimes we'll get the leftover greens from local grocery stores, lettuce and things that they can't sell. And then we also have that kiddie pool outside Aviary 2 that has the duckweed in it, and you can use scissors to just kind of clip off the tops of the duckweed, and surprisingly, ducks will have duckweed. And then just a kind of important note is that mealworms are always going to be live mealworms. So for ducklings and goslings, we're not going to use the freeze-dried mealworms that are out on the shelf. You're going to use the live worms. Always refill diets as needed. So if it's a little different than some of the other species of birds that we handle here in the clinic, if you look and all their food is gone, go ahead and feed them more. It's okay if this means that they are fed a bunch of times a day. And then the other note about diet before we move on is just not to let wet food sit out. So if you notice that they have gotten their food wet, which they will do, replace it. The duckling food can get really gross really fast if it is left wet. And then in terms of release, the plan for this year is that mallards and wood ducks will be released at 6 weeks of age and fully waterproof. So if it looks like they're fully waterproof and they are 6 weeks or older, they can go. Canada geese, similar age, slightly older, 6 to 8 weeks of age. And once they reach a specified weight and are also fully waterproof, obviously these birds are waterfowl, so we need to make sure they're waterproof before we let them go live in the water. And then mergansers, also 6 to 8 weeks of age and fully waterproof, but also we will typically give them some kind of live fish in the therapy pools and make sure that they can dive and catch those things. So that is the basic overview of how we're going to be raising our orphaned waterfowl here at the Wildlife Center of the North Coast this spring and summer. And I wanted to get this finished up and sent out to all of you because as of today, we have 29 ducklings in the building. So it is starting to happen already, and hopefully this information will help you to know what to do when you're here for your next shift.